Hi, Scott Jensen here. It is January 28th, 2023, a cold, wintry night in Minnesota. I hadn't really planned on doing a video about fact-checking, but what's happened over the last few days prompts the need for this. So let me go back in time. 3 days ago, I did a video, and the title introduction was, Heart Rhythm's Gone Wrong? Is your commercial pilot at risk? Quiet and scary changes in FAA regs. It took off quite a bit because this has been in the news. People were concerned. I did not introduce the concern. It was already there. I was trying to clarify. I went ahead and provided a 15-minute video or so, and in it, I did the following things. I mentioned the recent news regarding standards for commercial pilots' heart rhythms was leaving people confused. I also mentioned news sources basically asking the question, why the change with EKG standards? And Tucker Carlson on national news had talked about this, as had numerous other news sources. Then in the video, I explained the anatomy, and I talked about the muscle function, I talked about the electricity, and I talked about the plumbing. Then I talked about the concerns regarding the PR interval and changes in threshold levels as to when it becomes significant and requires more, if you will, workup or follow through if a pilot is identified as having a PR interval problem, which might constitute a diagnosis of first-degree AV block. And I explained that. Then I talked about the fact that the FAA made changes in the first-degree AV block response in October of 2022. In other words, prior to October of 2022, the response pattern to certain EKG changes was modified in October so that now it was different. And that was concerning, and I reviewed that. Then I provided the reassurance that there's oftentimes no problem with a first-degree AV block. But I also mentioned that if it's a change, that could be a red flag for a physician and aviation medical examiner. In those situations, if this is a new phenomenon, we have to ask ourselves questions. Then I said, the FAA said that the changes they made in October had nothing to do with COVID vaccination. And I said that in my video. If you go back to the video from 3 days ago, it was at about timestamp 10 minutes and 30 seconds. I specifically said that the FAA representative had said that it had nothing to do with COVID vaccination. And then I went on and I acknowledged public concerns, and I referenced the BMJ journal, British Medical Journal, that talked about factors for pilot restrictions, because commercial pilots can be restricted in regards to their ability to fly based on a variety of factors. And I mentioned that. And then I talked about the fact that the FAA had changed the standard. And then I talked about recent health changes in pilots. The video took off. And within the first day, I think it had probably had 100,000 reaches and maybe 75,000 views. But then Facebook flagged it with this banner. It says here, right across the bottom of the video, it says, missing content. Independent fact checkers say this information could mislead people. So I went into this. Well, why did they put a banner? Why did they, if you will, flag it or throttle it? So I click on it, and it says this, from independent fact checkers. It says, it quotes an article and says, new FAA cardiac health rules not prompted by COVID-19 shots. I said that. There was no missing content. There was no missing context. At 10 minutes and 30 seconds in that video, I specifically said that the FAA representative said this change had nothing to do with COVID vaccination. Now, let me step back. In this video, I also reference the fact that I read a lot of EKGs, I evaluate a lot of hearts, I have given lectures on cardiac dysrhythmias, I've given lectures on excuse me, I have given lectures on a variety of arrhythmias, including WPW and LGL. Those are different kinds of rhythm disturbances. And it's so frustrating for me because this is in my wheelhouse. I have taught med students and residents and given courses to help people get ready for their boards when it comes to cardiac dysrhythmias. So for me to be told that I don't get to speak to this issue, I have not been getting any cardiologists from Mayo Clinic or Abbott Northwestern Hospital or in any of my major journals saying that it's time for us to look at the PR interval with fresh eyes and no longer demand that the normal range be 120 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds and that we can have it be 120 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds. That isn't coming from the world of cardiology that I engage with every day. The FAA cardiologists are saying that they made this decision based on their data. I don't know what that data is, and it doesn't say it in this article, but this is the article. This is the article that the fact checkers say warrants my video being flagged. So what happened once my video was flagged? Boom. Yep. It went from 78,000 to 80,000 over 2 days. In other words, in the first 12 to 24 hours, it goes to 75,000 people watched it, and then it just stops. Now, in the meantime, other social media platforms, thousands and thousands and thousands of views. So I have to ask the question, what about these fact checkers? Don't they need to be checked? I mean, they've got their own personal agenda. I remember spending a couple of years ago on a fact-checking mission by a Facebook post I did on testing and also diagnosis criteria. And I spent 45 minutes with some young lady from another state trying to explain what the criteria were to make the diagnosis of COVID-19, as well as how a PCR test worked. And 45 minutes later, I don't know if any of it sunk in. I don't think that this fact checker had any foundation of understanding where they could really get what I was saying. So this time around, I find it particularly irritating to have this article be the basis for a banner put on my video. And what does this article say that the fact checker references? It says this. In a statement to the Associated Press, the FAA explained that this change was made in response to new scientific evidence about the condition from its cardiology consultants, not adverse reactions to COVID-19 vaccines. I said that in the video at 10 minutes and 30 seconds. Then it goes on and says, an update to the FAA's guidance on medical certification for pilots has prompted speculation about why the change was made, with some falsely claiming that it is connected to vaccinations against COVID-19. I never said it was connected. I said that people are asking questions about it. It's been reported on the news in a multitude of newspapers across the nation, and I think people have a right to ask that darn question. Then it goes on to say, in an otherwise healthy heart, this is usually a benign condition and rarely causes any symptoms, said Dr. Roland Assi, a cardiac surgeon and assistant at the University of California, San Diego. I said that. This paper they reference absolutely reflects my own thinking. Okay, why am I so passionate about this? More than 30 years ago, when I got home, my wife gave me this. I had just been at an airport. I had just taken my test to get my pilot's license. September 23rd, 1992. And my wife had it engraved, and it said, but they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. Isaiah 40:31. I've been a pilot for 31 years, and it matters to me. I've had FAA physicals. I've been asked to do FAA physicals. I've declined doing them. I have pilots calling me. I have doctors calling me. I understand how critically important it is that when someone entrusts their life in an airplane to a pilot, that pilot needs to be in tip-top shape, and we need to make certain that that's the case. Let's talk about some other fact-checking. This is an article within the last 2 weeks. From BizPack Review. January 15th, 2023, Vivek Saxena, S-A-X-E-N-A, BizPack Review. It says this: it only took 2.5 years, but CNN medical analyst Dr. Leanna Wen has finally admitted that COVID deaths and hospitalizations are being overcounted. Quote from Dr. Wen: "We are overcounting COVID deaths and hospitalizations. That's a problem," she wrote in a column published in the Washington Post. She goes on to say, "Two infectious disease experts I spoke with believe that the number of deaths attributed to COVID is far greater than the actual number of people dying from COVID," end quote. One of the two experts, Robin Dretler, an attending physician at Emory Decatur Hospital and the former president of Georgia's chapter of Infectious Diseases Society of America, estimated that 90% of the ostensible COVID patients at his hospital checked in for something entirely different. The other expert, Shira Daron, discovered that the use of the steroid dexamethasone was a pretty good proxy measure for hospitalizations due to the coronavirus. Quote, "If someone who tested positive didn't receive dexamethasone during their inpatient stay, they were probably in the hospital for a different cause," Dr. Wen noted. Australian journalist Adam Creighton tweeted, "We are overcounting COVID deaths and hospitalizations. That's a problem. People saying this a year ago were booted off social media." On this matter, I was fact-checked and ridiculed multiple times. Until recently. And then we see this in this same BizPack Review article. It says, this is what it says. Jeffrey Tucker says, "We truly do not know how many actually died from COVID, which means that not even the CFR is accurate," referencing the case fatality rate. Robert Redfield, the previous CDC director, said there is a perverse incentive for hospitals to overcount their coronavirus deaths by falsely attributing unrelated deaths to the virus. And then this article goes on to say this: one of the first individuals to voice the theory was Dr. Scott Jensen. In an interview back in April 2020, he revealed he'd received a disturbing guidance from the CDC's own National Vital Statistics System, urging him to misclassify unrelated deaths. Quote, "Last Friday, I received a 7-page document that ... And then it goes on to say in this article, following that bombshell interview, he began regularly appearing on Fox News and warning that both the NVSS's recommendations and the already inherent perverse incentive were creating a situation where the number of corona deaths nationwide were likely being overcounted." Another article in Expo's News, Rhoda Wilson. A jaw-dropping article published by the Wall Street Journal in December 2020 has resurfaced. Then we go to the article, and it says this: the Wall Street Journal - hospitals retreat from early COVID treatment and return to basics. And this was an article by Peter McCullough, and they reference the Wall Street Journal. Doctors often preemptively put patients on ventilators or gave powerful sedatives, largely abandoned in recent years. The aim was to save the seriously ill and protect hospital staff from COVID-19. This article, the Wall Street Journal, new hospital treatment for the most critically ill looks more like it did before the pandemic. In other words, we're starting to move. If you remember December 2020, initially there'd been all the ventilator use. We saw the fatality rate on ventilators go from the typical 30 to 40% up to 60 to 80%. And it said this, Dr. Iwashania, and this is a physician from University of Michigan, Department of Veterans Affairs Hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan, said, "We were intubating sick patients very early, not for the patient's benefit, but to control the epidemic and to save other patients. That felt awful." This was the same kind of thing. In the same article, they say this: "In a remarkable rarity of fact-checking gone right, during the heyday of COVID-19 disinformation, USA Today actually verified Dr. Scott Jensen's reports that hospitals were receiving financial incentives that he considered gaming the system, citing numerous independent so-called fact-checker opinion websites. Quote, this is the fact-checker saying this now. We rate the claim that hospitals get paid more if patients are listed as COVID-19 and on ventilators as true, end quote. Goes on. Hospitals and doctors do get paid more for Medicare patients diagnosed with COVID-19 or if it's considered presumed that they have COVID-19, absent a laboratory confirmed test. This was a point I made. You could diagnose COVID without a test. And this fact check goes on to say, and hospitals and doctors could receive 3 times more if the patients are placed on a ventilator. I was ridiculed by fact checkers. These articles are coming up. Another one, Tyler Durden, D-U-R-D-E-N, Sunday, January 22nd, just less than a week ago. Wall Street Journal editorial board member Alicia Finley has taken a flamethrower to vaccine makers over their deceptive campaign for bivalent COVID boosters and slams several federal agencies for taking the unprecedented step of ordering vaccine makers to produce them and recommending them without data supporting their safety or efficacy. This is what the Wall Street Journal article says. This is deceptive advertising. Then Alicia Finley says, 3 scientific problems have arisen. 1, the virus is mutating much faster than vaccines can be updated. 2, vaccines have hardwired our immune systems to respond to the original Wuhan strain, so we churn out fewer antibodies that neutralize variants targeted by updated vaccines. In other words, we get locked in to that initial exposure, the original Wuhan strain, which is no longer relevant in terms of causing disease because we've moved so far down the road with a variety of mutational variants. And then the third point she makes, antibody protection wanes after just a few months. Then she references the New England Journal of Medicine and says, the New England Journal of Medicine notes people who have taken said original vaccine were primed to respond to the Wuhan strain and mounted an inferior antibody response to other variants. The complaint is made in this article. In June, the FDA ordered vaccine makers to update the boosters against BA4 and BA5 and rushed the companies to push them out before clinical data was available. Finley further notes that vaccine makers could have performed small random trials last summer and early fall on the bivalents with results available by the end of September. But the Biden administration didn't want to wait. This is the Wall Street Journal article. What I'm getting at is we're getting selective fact checking. Too often, fact checking isn't about facts. It's about an insidious or accepted conventional narrative. This has got to stop. For me to have this recent video flagged as missing context, and then they use an article, which I already mentioned, new FAA cardiac health rules not prompted by COVID-19 shots. I said that in the video. I was very careful. Folks, we are seeing a fair amount of information coming forth that's laying it out pretty clearly. I don't think anybody wants to feel good about the fact that we dropped the ball over the last 3 years in a variety of ways, and I'm not going into a long list of it. But this fact-checking that doesn't deal with facts, but instead seems to honor some other agenda. I made it clear. The FAA representatives have said that they made an adjustment regarding first-degree AV block and what the acceptable PR interval standards are based on what their cardiologists felt was emerging information. And I'm protesting on the basis that I'm not getting that from the Mayo Clinic physician that are seeing patients of mine where we share patients. I'm not getting that kind of information. I'm not seeing those articles in the New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA whereby we're being, as physicians, told, listen, we can now change the parameters of the PR interval and we don't have to be quite as responsive if the interval is 200 to 300 milliseconds. I'm not getting that. The first time I saw it was in the recent hubbub regarding the quiet change in October 2022 regarding FAA standards. Over the last 72 hours, do you know who I've been hearing from? Doctors, nurses, and pilots. And quite a few of the pilots have been commercial pilots. So I'm just issuing a challenge to all the social media platforms. I know it's hard to do all the fact checking. There's a tremendous number of posts, but this fact check on my video is not warranted because I said exactly what the article says that was used by the fact checkers to say that I was missing context. I was not missing context. Now, I hope that this video is not flagged because I am being as honest as I can be. I am not interested in being some flamethrower. But over the last 3 years, we have seen fact-checking used as a tool to introduce an insidious, biased perspective that people have bought into. And what we're seeing over the last 3, 6, 12 months is that everything is not as it seemed. Think about it. Fact-checkers are not necessarily about facts.